The drone footage swept over the Bitterroot Range at dawn, capturing ridge after ridge of granite peaks that cut into the pale Montana sky like broken teeth. The wind carried no sound but its own voice, raw, unforgiving, ancient. No roads scarred these slopes, no power lines, no signs of civilization, except for a single dirt track that wound through the valley floor like a question mark, ending at a modest cabin built into the hillside as if the mountain itself had grown it there. The land stretched for miles in every direction, 640 acres of wilderness that didn't care whether you lived or died. The kind of place where nature made the rules and people were just passing through. 5 men had crossed a fence on this property 3 days ago. They had ignored the warnings, laughed at the signs, vandalized the land, and threatened the woman who owned it. 72 hours later, they were gone. No bodies, no blood, just abandoned trucks and a silence that made search teams nervous enough to request backup before entering the terrain. The woman who lived there had documentation. She had alibis. She had a past that nobody knew about, sealed in files that required federal clearance to access. What happened in those mountains during those 72 hours was never proven in any court of law. But after that week in late summer, nobody ever crossed her fence again. From which city in the world are you watching this story today? If you enjoy tales of quiet strength and the consequences of crossing the wrong person, please consider subscribing. This is a story about boundaries, respect, and what happens when people mistake silence for weakness. Reese Callahan walked her property line every morning at 0500 hours, moving with an economy of motion that suggested years of physical discipline. 27 years old, tall and lean, her frame carried no excess weight. Her hands bore calluses and scars, the kind of wear that came from work and from something harder to name. She checked each fence post, each sign, documenting everything in a weathered notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. When she found boot prints crossing the boundary line near the eastern ridge, she stopped. Her face showed nothing. She photographed the prints from multiple angles, measured the stride length, noted the tread pattern. Then she moved on. The locals called her that woman who bought the Morrison Range. She drove into town once a month for supplies at the general store in Prospect, population 412. She spoke to no one unless necessary, paid in cash, loaded her truck with practiced efficiency, left without small talk. Her routine was precise in ways that would make a drill instructor nod with approval. Morning coffee made the same way every day. 100 pull-ups on a bar mounted in the doorframe. An 8-mile run through terrain that would break most people. Firewood chopped with textbook efficiency, each piece the same size, stacked in geometrically perfect rows. A rifle hung above the fireplace, an M40A6, cleaned regularly, maintained with the care of someone who understood that equipment failure meant mission failure, and mission failure meant death. A single framed photograph sat on the mantel. 8 people in desert camouflage, weapons slung, standing before a transport vehicle. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Reese was 4th from the left, younger then. The man beside her was older, silver-haired even in that photograph. Colonel Vincent Drummond, the man who had taught her everything that mattered. 3 days after she photographed those boot prints, her trail cameras caught something that changed the equation entirely. 3 trucks rolled past a clearly posted "no trespassing" sign without slowing. Through the dusty windows, men with rifles were visible, laughing about something. The timestamp showed late afternoon. The GPS coordinates placed them 8 miles deep on her property, far past the point where anyone could claim they had made an innocent mistake. Reese sat in her cabin watching the footage on a laptop, her expression unchanging. She rewound the video, watched it again, froze the frame on a license plate, and zoomed in until the numbers were clear and sharp. She opened a drawer containing a satellite phone she had used exactly 3 times since purchasing the property 18 months ago. Stared at it for a long moment. then closed the drawer without picking it up. Instead, she opened another notebook filled with entries dating back months. Names, vehicle descriptions, patterns, timing, behavior observations written in the kind of shorthand that intelligence analysts would recognize immediately. She had been watching them for 147 days, learning their habits, counting how many times they ignored warnings that were clear enough for a child to understand. At the bottom of the latest page, she wrote, Day 147, first warning posted, compliance, 0, escalation, confirmed. Her eyes drifted back to the satellite phone drawer. After 10 minutes, she opened it again. This time she picked up the phone, turned it on, waited for it to acquire signal from the satellites passing overhead in their eternal orbits. One contact in the directory, just one, listed as Drummond. She pressed the call button. The connection took 8 seconds to establish, routing through encryption protocols that would make the NSA's equipment look like a child's toy. When the voice answered, it carried the gravel of age and experience. Reese, been wondering when you'd call. Colonel Vincent Drummond, 72 years old, retired from Navy Special Warfare Command after a career that spanned 4 decades in conflicts on 3 continents. 87 confirmed kills as a sniper, 15 years as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center, and for the last 14 years of her life, the closest thing to family that Reese Callahan had ever known. Sir, she said, and her voice carried a note it held for no one else. I have a situation. Montana situation or global situation? Local, property issue. There was a pause. Drummond thinking, calculating, running scenarios in a mind that still moved like precision machinery despite the 7 decades behind it. Talk to me. Reese pulled up the trail camera footage. 5 males, ages approximately 35 to 55. Repeated trespass violations over the past 4 months. Documented incursions, 43. Patterns suggest recreational hunting without permission. Initial violations were opportunistic. Recent activity shows increasing aggression and territorial behavior. You file with local law enforcement? Affirmative. Sheriff's office is understaffed. Response time to my location is 4 to 6 hours under optimal conditions. They logged the complaint but made it clear that property enforcement at this distance is not a priority. Another pause. Longer this time. What kind of escalation are we talking about? Reese pulled up the most recent footage. Last night, 1900 hours. 5 individuals approached within 200 yards of my primary structure. Vandalism of outbuildings, spray paint, deliberate damage to property markers, verbal threats recorded on audio, spotlights directed at windows. Duration, 23 minutes. Intent, intimidation. She could hear Drummond's breathing change. Not quite a sigh, something harder. You held position? Affirmative. Did not engage. Did not reveal presence. Gathered intelligence only. Good girl. The approval in his voice was slight but unmistakable. You've got 3 options here, Reese. Want to hear them? Yes, sir. Option 1, you sell the property. Take a loss if you have to. Move somewhere with better law enforcement coverage. Sometimes the smart, tactical decision is withdrawal. Reese said nothing. They both knew what her silence meant. Option 2, you accept the situation. Increased security measures, better locks, more cameras. You document everything and hope they get bored or sloppy enough that law enforcement eventually takes action. You absorb the harassment as the cost of living where you want to live. More silence. Option 3, Drummond's voice changed, dropped lower, took on an edge that Reese had heard before, in situations where the mission parameters had shifted from reconnaissance to direct action. You remind them why I spent 14 years teaching you. But if you choose option 3, you need to understand something. There are rules. I'm listening. Rule 1, no killing. You put a body on the ground, that's murder. And all your documentation and all my contacts can't protect you from that. Rule 2. No evidence that points back to direct action on your part. If they get hurt, it's because they made bad decisions in dangerous terrain, not because you forced them into anything. Rule 3. You give them a chance to walk away. Clear warning. Opportunity to withdraw. You only proceed if they ignore that final offer. Reese was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. You're talking about psychological operations. I'm talking about making them understand that your property is not a place they want to be, that the fence line is not a suggestion, that you are not a target. Drummond paused. Do you remember what I told you about the Desert Storm operation in '91? The one with the Iraqi command post. That's the one. 7 officers in a bunker complex. My team had orders to eliminate them. We didn't shoot people, we shot their infrastructure. Radio, water supply, made them believe they were under massive attack. They scattered into the desert. 40 hours later, the desert finished what we started. We never fired a shot at a human target. Mission accomplished. The Wolf Protocol, Reese said quietly. That's what the boys called it afterward. Not because I was hunting them, because I made them believe they were being hunted. And when you believe that, really believe it, you make decisions that get you killed, even when nobody's pulling a trigger. Reese looked at her maps, at the terrain features she had already marked, at the sight lines and the approaches and the kill zones that weren't meant for killing, but for controlling movement and creating fear. You think that would work here? I think 5 men who've been ignoring legal boundaries for months aren't going to respect a conversation or a stern warning. But I think they will respect consequences. Real consequences. The kind that make them wake up at 3 in the morning, wondering if they're safe in their own camp. Drummond's voice softened slightly. But Reese, you need to understand what you're choosing if you go this route. It's not combat. It's not self-defense in the legal sense. It's something else. And you have to live with that afterward. I've lived with worse. I know you have. That's why I'm asking if you're sure. Reese looked at the photograph on the mantel, at the younger version of herself standing next to Drummond in that desert sunset, at the other 6 faces in the frame, people she had trained with, fought beside, trusted with her life. 3 of them were dead now, 2 from combat, 1 from the kind of slow death that comes from bringing the war home inside your head and never being able to unload it. She had come to Montana to get away from all of that, to find something like peace, to build a life that didn't involve watching people through a scope and making calculations about wind speed and bullet drop and how much lead to give a moving target. But some things follow you, no matter how far you run. If I do this, she said slowly, I need guidance, real time if possible. You willing to walk me through it? Reese, I'm 72 years old and I live in a retirement community in Virginia where the biggest excitement is bingo night. You think I'm going to say no to one more operation? Despite everything, she almost smiled. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. We've got work to do. First thing, you need to know everything about these 5 men. Not just their names and their trucks. I mean everything. Family, jobs, skills, weaknesses, psychology. You can't manipulate behavior if you don't understand motivation. I have most of that already. Of course you do. Send me what you've got. I'll review it and we'll talk tomorrow at 0600 your time. And Reese, get some sleep tonight. Once this starts, you won't get much for a while. The call ended. Reese sat in the darkness of her cabin, listening to the wind outside and the subtle sounds of the mountain settling into night. Somewhere out there, 8 miles deep on her property, 5 men were probably sitting around a campfire, drinking beer, congratulating themselves on how they had scared the woman who thought she could tell them what to do. They had no idea what was coming. She stood and walked to the locked case she kept under her bed. Inside was equipment that didn't belong in a civilian home. Night vision optics, range-finding binoculars, a tactical vest with insignia so faded they were barely visible in dim light. the trident that marked her as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the program and survive the selection process that broke most men who attempted it. Her hand hovered over the vest. She paused, motionless for several seconds, remembering what it had felt like to wear it. The weight, the responsibility, the absolute certainty that came with being part of something larger than yourself. Then she closed the case without removing anything. Not yet. Instead, she opened another drawer. The worn moleskin notebook was different from the others. Smaller, black, filled with technical calculations and tactical observations, written in a shorthand that would be meaningless to anyone who hadn't spent years in military intelligence. Names, vehicle descriptions, movement patterns, frequency of violations, behavioral observations. At the bottom of the latest page, she wrote in careful script, Day 147, final warning posted, protocol selection, Wolf, Drummond advised, proceed 0400. Then she set her watch alarm for 4 in the morning and sat in the dark, waiting. The hunting camp was professional in its setup. 5 men in their 30s to 50s had established position 8 miles inside Reese's boundary line, far from any road, deep in terrain that required ATVs to access. They had portable butchering stations, high-end rifles with expensive optics, solar charging stations for their electronics. These were not amateurs playing at wilderness survival. The camp was organized and efficient, clearly the work of people who had done this many times before. They field-dressed in elk with practiced movements, no wasted motion, no hesitation, each man knowing his role in the process. One of them tossed an empty beer can into the stream that ran past their camp. Another walked to one of Reese's property markers and urinated directly on it, laughing as he did. The casual disregard was captured in perfect high definition by one of the trail cameras Reese had positioned to cover this exact area. Trent Holloway was the leader, 52 years old, weathered and confident in the way of men who had spent their lives convincing others to follow them. He had done 2 tours as a Marine, discharged under circumstances that were murky in the official records, but clear enough if you knew where to look. Domestic violence arrests, bar fights, a pattern of aggression that had followed him into civilian life. "You see those new signs on the fence line?" he said, cracking open another beer. "That woman must think she's running Fort Knox up here." Garrett Fisher was older at 48, more cautious, a widower with a 19-year-old daughter named Lily. He worked construction in Missoula and hunted these mountains to fill his freezer, not for sport. He should have known better. Part of him did know better, but peer pressure and 20 years of habit are powerful forces. "Maybe we should be concerned," Garrett offered, his voice carrying doubt that the others pretended not to hear. "She filed a police report. I heard about it from my cousin who works dispatch." Trent laughed. The sound carried no humor. "Police report, that's rich. You know how long it takes for the sheriff to get up here? We could throw a full barbecue and be gone before they even left the station. And what are they going to do about trespassing anyway? Write us a ticket? Fine us $100 each?" Mason Riley was 38, cocky, the kind of man who had spent his life being told he was special and had never been given reason to doubt it. "She probably doesn't even know we're here. Some city woman who bought land she can't manage. Probably sits in her cabin watching Netflix and hoping the wilderness stays on the other side of her door." Boone Walker and Cade Mercer were quieter, followers, not leaders. They went along because going along was easier than making waves. Both in their mid-30s, both with jobs and families back in Prospect, both making the kind of small compromises that seem harmless until they add up to something that can't be taken back. Trent agreed with Mason's assessment. Even if she did know, what's she going to do? Come out here and ask us nicely to leave? Flash a can of pepper spray? More laughter. The kind that men share when they think they're among friends and no one is keeping score. Garrett tried one more time. "I'm just saying, those signs mentioned surveillance. Active surveillance. That means cameras. That means evidence." "Evidence of what?" That we walked on public land? These property lines up here are a joke. Half of them aren't even surveyed properly. Any lawyer worth his retainer could argue we thought we were on national forest. Trent tossed his own beer can into the bushes. We've been running these mountains for 15 years. Nobody's ever stopped us. Some woman with a fence and a sign isn't going to change that now. What Trent Holloway didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every word of this conversation was being recorded in crystal clear digital audio. That the woman they were dismissing as irrelevant had been watching them for months with equipment that could count the hairs on their heads from 1,000 yards away. That she had already built a psychological profile of each man that would let her exploit their fears with surgical precision. And that in approximately 6 hours, she was going to begin an operation that would make them regret every single choice that had led them to this moment. The night deepened. The temperature dropped. The 5 men settled into their sleeping bags, comfortable and secure in the knowledge that they were in control of this situation, that they were the predators in these woods, that nothing out here in the darkness was stronger or smarter or more dangerous than they were. They were wrong on every count, but they wouldn't understand that until it was far too late. The darkness before dawn is different in the mountains, thicker, more complete, the kind of black that makes you question whether your eyes are open or closed. At 0400 hours, Reese Callahan moved through that darkness like she had been born to it. She wore black from head to toe, not the matte, tactical black of military operations, but something duller, clothes that had been washed in dirt and rubbed with charcoal until they absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Her face was covered with a mixture of mud and ash that broke up the recognizable shapes of human features. In the darkness, she was less a person and more a suggestion, a shadow that moved with purpose. The pack on her back weighed 38 pounds. She knew the exact number because she had weighed it 3 times, adjusting the contents until the distribution was perfect. Rope, batteries, audio recording devices, flares, a small toolkit, energy bars that tasted like cardboard but provided exactly the right caloric density, first aid supplies, the black notebook, a pencil, no ammunition. The M40A6 rifle was slung across her back, but the magazine well was empty. She had checked it 4 times before leaving the cabin, a ritual that felt strange after years of operations, where an unloaded weapon meant a death sentence. But this was different. This mission had different rules. Her satellite phone sat in a waterproof pocket, set to vibrate only. Drummond would be awake by now, monitoring from 3,000 miles away, ready to provide guidance if she needed it. The trail cameras had given her the exact location of their camp, 8 miles from her cabin as the crow flies, 11 miles following the terrain that would keep her off ridgelines and out of sight lines. She could have made it in 2 hours if she pushed. Instead, she took 4, moving with the patience that Drummond had drilled into her over 14 years of training. Patience is the difference between snipers and shooters, he had told her when she was 15 years old and thought speed was everything. Any fool can pull a trigger fast. It takes discipline to wait, to watch, to understand the rhythm of a place before you disturb it. The terrain rose and fell in waves of granite and pine. Streams cut through valleys like veins, their water so cold it could kill you in minutes if you fell in. She avoided the meadows, kept to the tree line, moved when the wind moved so that any sound she made would be lost in the natural noise of the forest. At 0600, the satellite phone vibrated against her ribs. She found cover behind a boulder and pulled it out. "Position," Drummond said without preamble. 6 miles out, making good time, no contact. Weather? She looked at the sky. Still dark, but the stars were sharp and clear. Clear, no precipitation forecast. Temperature dropping. Should hit freezing by tomorrow night. Good. Cold works in your favor. Makes people want to stay close to their fire. Makes them huddle together instead of spreading out. What's your approach plan? Reese pulled out her map. using a red-filtered penlight to illuminate it without destroying her night vision. High ground first. Observation post on the ridge above their camp. I need to watch them for at least 6 hours. Understand their routine. Who gets up first? Who's paranoid? Who's confident? Can't manipulate psychology if I don't know the psychology. That's my girl. There was approval in Drummond's voice. Remember the 3 phases? Phase 1, reconnaissance and psychological mapping. Phase 2, introduction of uncertainty. Phase 3, escalation to panic. Each phase has to be completed before moving to the next, or the whole operation falls apart. And if something goes wrong, if they spot you, withdraw immediately. No engagement, no contact. Abort and reassess. Exactly. This only works if you're a ghost, Reese. The moment you become real to them, the moment they can point at something and say, that's her, that's the threat, you lose the psychological advantage. Fear of the unknown is always stronger than fear of the known. Understood. One more thing. Drummond's voice changed slightly, softer. You see that one? Garrett Fisher, the one with the daughter. You see him, you remember he had a choice. He chose to be there. Chose to come onto your property after you warned them. Chose to stand with the others when they vandalized your home. Don't let sympathy become a weakness. But even as he said it, they both knew it was more complicated than that. It was always more complicated than that. I'll keep you updated, Reese said, and ended the call. She found the observation post she had identified on the map 3 days ago. A cluster of boulders on a ridge 600 yards above the camp, with clear sight lines down and perfect concealment from below. She settled into position, made herself comfortable, and waited for the sun to rise. This was familiar. This was home. Not the cabin, not Montana, not any physical place, but this, the waiting, the watching, the absolute focus on a mission that had clear parameters and measurable success criteria. This made sense in a way that civilian life never quite had. Through her range-finding binoculars, she could see the camp in perfect detail once the light came up. 5 tents arranged in a loose circle around a central fire pit. Vehicles parked 30 yards away under camouflage netting that was good but not good enough. Solar panels charging batteries, a portable toilet set up downwind. These men knew what they were doing. They had done this before. She spent the next 6 hours building a profile that would have impressed any intelligence analyst. Trent Holloway was the first one up at 0530. He checked the perimeter with a handheld radio, making sure everyone was accounted for. Leader behavior, alpha personality, would be the hardest to break. Garrett Fisher was second up at 0600. He made coffee for everyone. Caretaker behavior. He was the glue that held the group together. Also the one with the most to lose. The photograph of his daughter suggested a man who cared about something beyond himself. That was leverage. Mason Riley slept until 0730 and complained about the coffee. Entitled, weak, would break first under pressure. Boone Walker and Cade Mercer were followers. They did what Trent told them to do, laughed at his jokes, agreed with his decisions. No independent thought. They would follow whoever seemed strongest. At 1300 hours, Reese made her first move. She had positioned audio playback devices during her approach, small speakers powered by long-life batteries, hidden in the forest at strategic points around the camp. The technology was simple, but the effect would be psychological. She activated the first device 300 yards from camp. The recording played at barely audible volume, just a branch cracking. The kind of sound that happens 1,000 times a day in any forest. Natural, explainable. But this crack happened at the exact moment when all 5 men were sitting around the fire, eating lunch. The exact moment when the forest was otherwise silent. Through her binoculars, she watched Trent's head turn toward the sound. Watched him pause mid-sentence. Watched the other men notice his reaction. "You hear that?" Boone said. Trent nodded slowly. "Probably an elk." They went back to eating, but the ease had left the conversation. They were listening now, paying attention to the forest in a way they hadn't been 5 minutes earlier. Phase 1 had begun. At 1500 hours, she activated the second device. Closer this time, 200 yards. The recording was different. Footsteps, human footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through underbrush. The sound played for 8 seconds, then stopped. All 5 men were on their feet immediately. Trent grabbed his rifle. Mason looked around like he expected someone to step out of the trees. Garrett's face had gone pale. "Somebody's out there," Mason said, and his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Trent's jaw was tight. Could be a hiker, could be Forest Service. 8 miles from the nearest trail? Garrett shook his head. Nobody hikes out here. They spread out, started moving toward where the sound had come from. Reese watched through her scope, her breathing slow and controlled as they searched the area. They found nothing, of course. The device was hidden too well. After 20 minutes, they gave up and returned to camp. But the damage was done. They were nervous now, jumping at shadows. The confidence they had shown the night before was cracking. At 1700 hours, Reese made her second call to Drummond. "Status," he said. "Phase 1 proceeding as planned. Subjects are aware of anomalous sounds. Stress indicators visible. No panic yet. Maintaining observation position." "Good. When do you move to Phase 2? Reese looked at the sky. "Tonight, 2300 hours. They should be asleep or close to it. That's when I introduce direct evidence of intrusion." "The ammunition removal?" "Affirmative. All 5 rifles. Extract magazines, remove ammunition, replace magazines. Leave the rounds arranged in a visible location so they know it was deliberate." Drummond was quiet for a moment. "That's high risk. You'll be operating within 50 yards of their position. If anyone wakes up, if they have a guard posted, you're compromised." "I understand the risk." Another pause, longer this time. "Once you cross that line, once you start directly manipulating their equipment, this becomes something different. Are you sure?" She looked down at the camp, at the 5 men who had ignored every warning, who had vandalized her property, who had come to her home in the dark and tried to frighten her into leaving. "I'm sure," she said. "All right then, I'll be standing by. You run into trouble, you call me immediately. Understood?" "Understood. Callahan out." She settled in to wait for darkness. The men prepared dinner, ate, talked, gradually wound down for the night. They were more subdued than they had been the night before. The sounds in the forest had rattled them. At 2200, Mason and Boone went to their tents. At 2230, Cade followed. Trent and Garrett sat by the fire for another hour, talking in low voices. Finally, at 2340, they both turned in. Reese waited another 30 minutes. Let the camp settle into true sleep, the kind of deep rest that comes after a full day outdoors. Then she moved. The descent from her observation post took 20 minutes of painstaking care. Every step calculated, every handhold tested. The penalty for a single mistake was mission failure, and possibly worse. She approached the camp from downwind. The fire had burned down to coals. The only light came from the stars overhead. She pulled out her night vision monocular. The world turned green and bright. 5 rifles leaned against a makeshift rack near the fire pit. Convenient. Almost too convenient. These men had gotten sloppy because nothing had ever punished them for being sloppy. Reese moved to the first rifle, a Remington 700 with a decent scope. She removed the magazine with practiced ease, the click sounding impossibly loud, but not loud enough to wake anyone. Extracted the 4 rounds inside, set them aside, replaced the empty magazine, moved to the next rifle. The second rifle was a Ruger American, 5 rounds. Extract, set aside, replace. The third was another Remington, 4 rounds. The fourth was a Winchester XPR, 3 rounds. The fifth was a Weatherby Vanguard, 5 rounds. 21 rounds total. She arranged them in a neat row on a flat rock next to the fire pit, perfectly aligned, impossible to miss. A message that said, "I was here while you slept. I could have done anything. I chose to show you mercy." Then she pulled out a small note card she had prepared earlier. The message was printed in block letters. "Warning, you were vulnerable. Leave now while you can." She placed it beneath the ammunition and stepped back to admire her work. In the green glow of her night vision, it looked almost artistic. Then she heard the zipper. Someone was getting out of their tent. Reese froze. Every muscle locked. Her breathing stopped. This was the moment where training met reality, where all the practice and all the preparation either worked or failed catastrophically. Garrett Fisher stumbled out of his tent, clearly half asleep, heading for the portable toilet. He was 10 yards away, moving directly toward her position. She had 3 seconds to make a decision. She dropped to the ground like gravity had increased tenfold, pressed herself flat against the earth, controller her breathing to absolute silence, became a piece of the landscape, a shadow among shadows, nothing worth noticing. Garrett walked past her position, 4 feet away, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath from dinner. He never looked down, never saw her, just walked to the toilet, used it, walked back to his tent. The zipper closed. Reese waited, counted to 300. 5 full minutes of lying motionless on the cold ground, while her heart hammered and her training screamed at her to move, to withdraw, to get clear before her luck ran out. At 300, she rose, moved backward, retraced her approach path with even more care than before, because the adrenaline was making her want to rush, and rushing was how you died. She was 50 yards clear when her satellite phone vibrated. "Talk to me," Drummond said. "Phase 2 complete, no compromise. All ammunition removed and displayed. Warning note placed. Currently withdrawing to observation post. Any issues?" One subject exited tent during placement, passed within contact range, did not detect my presence. She heard Drummond exhale. "That's too close, Reese." Mission accomplished regardless. Mission accomplished isn't the same as mission accomplished safely. He stopped himself. "I know. I'll be more careful." "You better be. What's your plan for phase 3? "Let them discover what I've done. Observe reaction. Based on their response, I'll determine timing for the next escalation." She reached her observation post and settled back into position. The camp below was silent, peaceful. The men had no idea what they would wake up to. "Get some rest," Drummond said. "You've got a few hours before sunrise." "Will do. Callahan out." The stars wheeled overhead. The temperature dropped. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The real thing, not a recording, and the sound carried across the empty spaces between peaks. At 0530, just as the eastern sky was starting to lighten from black to deep blue, Trent Holloway emerged from his tent. Reese watched through her binoculars as he walked to the fire pit to restart the fire. He saw the ammunition immediately. She watched his body language change, watched him freeze mid-step, watched his hand drop to his hip, where a sidearm would be, watched him look around the camp in a quick 360, searching for threats. Then he saw the note. He picked it up, read it again. His face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical in any other context. Confusion, disbelief, anger, fear. He walked quickly to the rifle rack, grabbed his Remington, dropped the magazine, saw that it was empty, checked the other rifles. All empty. "Everyone up, now! Get up now!" The shout tore through the morning quiet like a gunshot. Within seconds, all 5 men were stumbling out of their tents. Trent held up the note and the ammunition. "Someone was here last night, in our camp, while we were sleeping. They took every round out of every rifle and left this." Mason's face went pale. "What do you mean someone was here? We had 5 guys sleeping 10 yards apart. Nobody could..." Well, somebody did. Trent's voice was sharp, with an edge of panic he was trying to control. Look at this. 21 rounds arranged in a perfect line. This wasn't random. This wasn't an animal. This was deliberate. Garrett picked up one of the rounds, turning it over in his fingers. How is this possible? I got up at midnight to use the toilet. I walked right past this spot. There was nothing here. Boone looked around with wide eyes. You think it was that woman? The one who owns this land? Of course it was her. Mason's voice had climbed half an octave. Who else would it be? She's been watching us this whole time. Trent was trying to reassert control. Okay, everyone calm down. So she found our camp. So she played some kind of prank. We're 5 guys. She's 1 woman. She had to sneak around in the dark because she's too afraid to confront us directly. But Garrett was shaking his head. You don't understand. Look at how the rounds are arranged. Look at the note. This wasn't a prank. This was a message. She's telling us she could have done anything while we slept. She could have hurt us. She chose not to. This is a warning. A warning? Trent grabbed the note and crumpled it. I don't get warned off my hunting grounds by some woman playing tactical games. We're not leaving. Maybe we should. Garrett's voice was quiet but firm. Maybe we should take the warning and go home. No way. Mason had recovered some bravado. We're not going to let her chase us off. I say we find her, track her down. Reese lowered her binoculars, processing what she was hearing. The group was fracturing. Garrett wanted to leave. Mason wanted to escalate. Trent was caught between his pride and growing uncertainty. This was progressing faster than expected. The psychological impact of waking up to discover that someone had been in your camp, had touched your weapons, had stood over you while you slept. That was primal fear. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Drummond. Phase 2 reaction, group fracturing. Primary subject resisting withdrawal. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3 ahead of schedule. The response came back 90 seconds later. Concur, subjects in heightened stress state. Optimal conditions for Phase 3 introduction. Proceed with caution. Remember, ghost protocol only works if you remain a ghost. The 5 men argued for 20 minutes. Finally, Trent made a decision. We're staying, but we're doing it smart. From now on, someone's awake at all times. We set a watch rotation. We check the perimeter every hour, and tomorrow morning, we pack up and move to a new location deeper in the forest. It was exactly the wrong decision. Exactly what Reese had hoped he would decide. Moving deeper into the forest meant moving further from help, meant isolating themselves even more. Garrett tried one more time. Trent, this is a bad idea. We should leave. I'm not running from some woman who thinks she owns the mountains, Trent said flatly. End of discussion. Garrett looked at the other men, searching for support. Found none. They were scared, but they were more scared of looking weak in front of each other. Male ego, Reese thought, the most predictable force in human psychology. The sun climbed higher. In the camp below, 5 men tried to convince themselves they were still in control. They were wrong. Phase 3 would begin tonight, and after Phase 3, there would be no going back for any of them. The second night came faster than the 5 men wanted it to. They had spent the day in a state of heightened alertness that exhausted them more than any physical labor could have. Every sound in the forest became a potential threat. Every shadow held menace. Trent had organized them into a watch rotation. 2 hours on, 8 hours off, cycling through all 5 men. It was a good plan on paper, but Reese Callahan had spent 12 years learning how to defeat exactly these kinds of defensive measures. She knew that watch rotations created predictable patterns, knew that scared men got tired, and tired men made mistakes. She had moved her observation post during the day. Now she was positioned on a different ridge, 300 yards from their camp instead of 600, with better sight lines and multiple escape routes. The closer position was riskier, but Phase 3 required precision. At 2200 hours, she activated the first of 5 audio devices positioned throughout the forest in a careful pattern around their camp. This one was 200 yards to the north. The recording was simple. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through underbrush. Walking in a circle around the perimeter. Mason was on watch. She saw him through her night vision scope, sitting by the fire, trying to look alert but fighting to keep his eyes open. When the footsteps started, his head snapped up. He stood quickly, nearly dropping his rifle. Turned toward the sound, strained to see into the darkness beyond the firelight. The footsteps continued for 30 seconds, then stopped. Mason waited, every muscle tense. When nothing else happened, he relaxed slightly, probably telling himself it was just an animal. Then Reese activated the second device. This one was to the east. Same recording, footsteps circling, maintaining the same distance from camp, moving at the same measured pace. Mason's head whipped toward the new sound. Now he was truly frightened. One set of footsteps could be explained away. 2 sets, coming from different directions, maintaining a perfect perimeter. That was something else entirely. He moved to Trent's tent and shook it. "Trent, wake up! Something's out there!" Trent emerged, groggy and irritated. "What are you talking about?" "Listen." They both stood silent. The footsteps had stopped. The forest was quiet except for the wind and the crackling fire. "I don't hear anything," Trent said. "It was there. Footsteps walking around the camp from 2 different directions." Trent looked at Mason like he was trying to decide if the younger man was losing his mind. "You sure it wasn't just deer?" "Deer don't walk in circles around a camp." Before Trent could respond, Reese activated the third device. South side. The footsteps began again, deliberate and unhurried. Both men froze. Now Trent heard it too. His face changed. The skepticism drained away, replaced by something harder to read. Not quite fear yet, but close. The dawning realization that they were not alone, and that whoever was circling their camp was doing it intentionally. "Get everyone up," Trent said quietly. "Right now." Within 5 minutes, all 5 men were awake and armed. They stood in a tight cluster near the fire, rifles pointed outward. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence was worse. "Who's out there?" Trent shouted into the darkness. His voice sounded smaller than he probably wanted it to. "Identify yourself." No response, just the wind moving through the pines. "This is private property," he tried again, which would have been funny if the situation weren't so tense. They were on someone else's private property. "You need to leave immediately." Still nothing. Garrett's voice was shaking. "It's her. It has to be. She's out there watching us right now." "One woman?" Mason's bravado was back, fueled by fear. "There's 5 of us. Let's go find her." "Nobody's going anywhere," Trent said, but his voice lacked conviction. They stood like that for 20 minutes. Gradually, exhaustion crept back in. When nothing else happened, Trent made the decision to return to the watch rotation. But now 2 men would be awake at all times. Reese waited until 0200, the dead zone of the night when human circadian rhythms hit their lowest point. Boone and Cade were on watch, sitting on opposite sides of the fire, trying to stay awake. She activated all 5 audio devices simultaneously. The effect was overwhelming. Footsteps from every direction, not running, not aggressive, just walking, circling, maintaining that same deliberate pace. The sound created the impression of multiple people moving through the forest in perfect coordination, tightening the noose. But layered beneath the footsteps was something else. A voice, barely audible, just above the threshold of hearing. Colonel Drummond's voice, distorted and echoed, reciting words that wouldn't make sense, but would burrow into their subconscious. Desert Storm, 1991. 7 targets, 40 hours, none survived. The message repeated on a loop, creating an audio landscape designed to be confusing and terrifying. The men wouldn't be able to identify the words clearly. They would just hear the suggestion of a voice speaking from the darkness. All 5 men were on their feet within seconds. This time, nobody bothered with shouts or challenges. They knew who was doing this, knew it was deliberate. "We need to leave," Garrett said, his voice cracking. "Right now. Pack up and get out." "It's the middle of the night," Trent shot back. "We'd be stumbling in the dark. That's what she wants. We stay here where we have fire and light and wait for dawn. She's been in our camp once already. She can do it again. Then we stay awake, all of us. We watch each other's backs until sunrise." The footsteps continued for another 3 minutes, then stopped all at once. The silence that followed was profound. The 5 men stood in their circle, rifles pointed outward, waiting. Nothing happened. Reese had already moved. While they were distracted, she had closed the distance. She was now 50 yards away, concealed in thick brush, watching them through her night vision while they stared uselessly into darkness their eyes couldn't penetrate. She pulled out a small device that looked like a modified camera flash. Military-grade photostrobe, capable of producing 2.3 million candle power in a single burst. She had positioned 5 of these devices in the trees during the previous day's reconnaissance. At 02:15, she triggered all 5 strobes at once. The night turned to day for exactly 1/10 of a second. 5 massive bursts of light from 5 different directions, synchronized perfectly, creating the impression of lightning strikes, or explosions, or something supernatural. They opened fire, not at any specific target, just shooting into the darkness where the lights had been, their training and common sense completely overwhelmed by panic. 30, 40, 50 rounds poured out into the forest in every direction. The muzzle flashes strobed. Spent casings hit the ground like brass rain. Then silence. The shooting stopped. The men stood panting, eyes wide, realizing what they had just done. "Did we hit anything?" Mason asked, his voice high and thin. Trent's hands were shaking. "I don't know. I don't know what I was shooting at." "Jesus Christ," Cade whispered. "What is happening?" Garrett dropped his rifle and put his hands on his knees, breathing hard like he might be sick. "We need to leave. Please, we need to leave right now." But Trent was shaking his head. "We can't navigate in the dark. We'll get lost. We have to wait for light." "Then what do we do until then?" Nobody had an answer. They gathered closer to the fire, feeding it more wood until the flames rose high. It didn't help much. The forest was vast and the light was small. Reese withdrew to her observation post and called Drummond. "I heard shooting," he said without preamble. "Please tell me you didn't engage." "Negative. They fired blind." Photo strobes triggered their panic response. Approximately 50 rounds expended. No targets, no injuries. Pure fear reaction. Drummond was quiet for a moment. "That's further along than I expected. You've got them completely destabilized." "Affirmative. They're discussing withdrawal, but the primary subject is preventing it. He's prioritizing ego over safety." "Then that's when you hit them with the final piece, the thing that breaks them completely." Reese knew what he meant. The psychological literature was clear. People could handle uncertain threats for a while. But the moment you introduced a personal element, the moment you made it clear that the threat knew them individually, that's when rational thought collapsed entirely. "The photographs," she said. "The photographs. You have them ready?" "Affirmative. 5 Polaroid images captured during yesterday's surveillance. Each subject photographed without their knowledge. Clear message that I've been watching them individually." "And the note?" Reese pulled out the prepared card, read it aloud. "I've chosen the order. Number 1 will be first, unless you choose differently." "That's cold, Reese." "It's effective. It's both." Drummond paused. "You understand what this will do to them? The moment they see those photographs, they're going to turn on each other. Group cohesion will shatter." "I understand. And you're ready for what happens when 5 scared men with guns start seeing each other as threats." She thought about the thin line between controlling chaos and creating it. I'll be monitoring. If the situation deteriorates to immediate danger, I'll extract and contact local law enforcement. That's not a plan, that's a hope. But I know you well enough to know I'm not going to talk you out of this. So be careful. Scared people are unpredictable, and unpredictable people get other people killed. Understood. Callahan out. She waited until 0400, the darkest hour. The men were still awake, still clustered around their fire, but exhaustion was winning. They were starting to nod off despite themselves, because the human body can only maintain peak alertness for so long. Reese moved down from her observation post with the photographs in a waterproof envelope. She approached from downwind, got within 30 yards, 20, 10. The photographs were mounted on stiff cardstock. Each one showed a different man engaged in some private activity. Mason urinating against a tree, Boone examining a blister, Cade writing in a journal, Trent counting money from his wallet, Garrett looking at the photograph of his daughter that he kept in his breast pocket. Innocent activities, private moments, but captured by someone they had never seen, never heard, never detected. Each photograph had a number written in red marker in the corner, 1 through 5. Trent was number 1. Reese selected a tree visible from the fire but outside their defensive perimeter. Used tape to attach all 5 photographs to the trunk at eye level. Put the note card above them. Then she withdrew as silently as she had come. At 0530, as the sky was just beginning to lighten, Garrett stood to stretch his legs. His eyes swept the tree line out of habit. He saw the photographs. For a moment, he just stared. Then understanding hit him like a physical blow. "Oh my God," he said, his voice strangled. "Trent, you need to see this." The other men looked up, followed his pointing finger, saw the photographs gleaming in the pre-dawn light. They approached slowly, as if the photographs might be dangerous to look at. When they got close enough to see the details, to recognize themselves, to see the numbers, to read the note, the effect was immediate and devastating. Mason stumbled backward. "She's been watching us. Jesus Christ, she's been watching us the whole time." Boone's face had gone gray. "When did she take these? I never saw anyone." Cade was staring at his photograph with horror. "She was close enough to take pictures, close enough to touch us, and we never knew." But it was Trent's reaction that Reese was watching most carefully. The man who had been so confident, who had insisted they stay, who had refused to show fear. He was staring at his photograph with the number 1 next to it, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. "I'm number 1, he said quietly. "She's going to start with me." "Start what?" Garrett demanded. "It means we're being hunted." Mason's voice had climbed to near hysteria. "It means she's picking us off, one by one." "Nobody's getting picked off," Trent said, but the conviction was gone. "This is psychological warfare. She's trying to scare us." "Well, it's working." Boone grabbed his pack. "I'm done. I'm out. You guys can stay, but I'm walking out right now." "In the dark? Through terrain you don't know?" "I'll risk it. Better than sitting here waiting to be number 1 or 2 or whatever." Garrett was pulling down the photographs, studying them with desperate attention. His hand stopped when he got to his own photograph, the one showing him looking at the picture of his daughter. "She knows about Lily," he said softly. "She knows I have a daughter. She's been close enough to see what's in my wallet." The implications hung in the air. If she had been that close, what else could she have done? What else had she chosen not to do? Trent was trying to salvage the situation. "Okay, new plan. We pack up right now. We don't wait for full light. We navigate out using GPS. We stay together. We watch each other's backs. And we get the hell out of here." For once, nobody argued. They moved with frantic energy, throwing gear into packs, taking down tents, loading vehicles with none of the organization they had shown setting up. Everything was driven by a single imperative: leave, get out. At 0600, they were ready to move. 3 vehicles, 5 men, a plan to drive out together, stay in visual contact, don't stop until they hit pavement. They made it 300 yards before the road exploded beneath them. Not literally, but the simultaneous detonation of all 3 vehicles' tires, triggered by military-grade spike strips that Reese had positioned during the night and remotely activated from her observation post, sounded like a controlled demolition. The precision was the terrifying part. Not all at once when they started driving, not randomly as they hit different points, but exactly 300 yards from camp. Far enough that they thought they were escaping, close enough that walking back would be admitting defeat. Reese had calculated it perfectly, had watched them load the vehicles, start the engines, begin their retreat, had waited until hope had started to bloom in their chests. Then she'd press the button on her remote detonator. The message was clear. I'm not chasing you. I'm hurting you. The trucks lurched to a stop, rims grinding into dirt. The 5 men sat in their vehicles for a moment, stunned. Then Trent got out to inspect the damage. The others followed. They stared at the shredded tires, at the professional-grade spike strips, at the wreckage of their escape plan. She did this, Mason said. She knew we would run, and she blocked the only way out. Garrett was looking around with wild eyes. Where is she? Why doesn't she show herself? What Reese wanted was for them to understand consequences, to understand that boundaries meant something, that warnings were not suggestions, that a woman alone was not the same thing as a woman helpless. But she couldn't tell them that. The moment she became a real person instead of a ghost in the forest, she lost her advantage. So she remained silent, watched through her scope as they argued and panicked. We walk out, Trent finally decided. 8 miles to my property line, another 4 to the main road, 12 miles. We can make that by nightfall. 12 miles through her territory? Cade shook his head. She'll pick us off one by one. She hasn't killed anyone yet, Garrett pointed out, and there was something desperate in his voice, something hopeful. She's had chances. She's been close enough, but she hasn't. Maybe she won't. Maybe if we just leave quietly, she'll let us go. Or maybe she's saving it for when we're spread out, Mason countered. They stood in a circle. 5 men who had been so confident 72 hours ago, now reduced to frightened animals trying to find a way out of a trap they had walked into voluntarily. Finally, Trent made the decision. We walk, together. Nobody separates. We move fast. And if we see her, we... He stopped, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence. What would they do? Shoot her? That would be murder. Talk to her? After everything they had done, what possible conversation could they have? We just get out, he finished lamely. That's all we need to do. They gathered what they could carry and started walking. Left behind the vehicles, the camping equipment, the rifles with no ammunition, everything that had seemed important a few days ago. Walked with the desperate energy of men who knew they had made terrible mistakes and were hoping it wasn't too late to escape the consequences. Reese followed at a distance, not to attack them, not to hurt them, just to make sure they kept moving in the right direction. Away from her property, away from land they had no right to be on. She watched them stumble through the forest, watched them argue, watched the group cohesion begin to fracture under stress. At 1400 hours, approximately 8 hours into their walk, Mason made a decision. He saw an opportunity when the others were distracted checking a map, and he took it. Broke away from the group, started running perpendicular to their course, crashing through underbrush with all the subtlety of a wounded elk. Mason, get back here, Trent shouted, but Mason was gone, convinced that his best chance of survival was to stop being number 4 and start being a solo target in terrain he thought he could navigate. He was wrong. On both counts. Reese didn't follow him, didn't need to. Mason was running blind, panicked, making every mistake that people made when they let fear override training. He would exhaust himself within an hour, would get disoriented, would realize too late that he had no water, no supplies, No plan beyond run. The other four continued without him. They were down to 4 men now, and the loss made them feel more vulnerable, made them walk faster, made them jump at every sound. At 1800 hours, as the sun was dropping toward the horizon and the temperature was beginning to fall, they reached the boundary line. Reese's fence. The signs they had ignored so many times before, they crossed it without hesitation, kept walking, didn't stop until they hit the main road 2 hours later, stumbling out of the forest like refugees from a war zone. A passing motorist saw them, called the sheriff. By 2200 hours, all 4 men were being interviewed by Sheriff Lucas Brennan, trying to explain what had happened without admitting to all the laws they had broken. Reese watched from a distance as the patrol cars arrived, as the men gave their statements, as Brennan tried to make sense of a situation that made no sense. She remained in the forest, invisible, documenting everything with her camera, building her defensive case in case she ever needed one. Mason's body would be found 6 weeks later, 18 miles from where he had separated from the group, in a ravine on the Montana side of the state line. The medical examiner would rule hypothermia. He had run until he couldn't run anymore, then collapsed as his core temperature dropped and his body shut down. No signs of violence, no evidence of foul play, just a man who had made bad decisions in dangerous terrain. The other 4 would tell their stories to law enforcement, to friends, to anyone who would listen. Would talk about the woman in the mountains who had hunted them, who had gotten into their camp without being detected, who had driven them out of the forest in terror. But they would never file charges, never pursue legal action, because to do that they would have to admit to trespassing, to vandalism, to harassment, to all the things they had done that precipitated everything that followed. And because somewhere deep down, they knew that Reese Callahan had given them something the law never could have, a second chance. She could have killed them, could have made them disappear in terrain that held secrets for decades. Instead, she had let them run, let them choose their own fates, let natural consequences teach them what legal consequences never had. Epilogue. 3 years later. 3 years after that night, nobody had crossed Reese Callahan's fence line again. The local hunting community had absorbed the lesson on a fundamental level. That woman who lived on the Morrison Range was not to be trifled with. Her signs meant something. Her boundaries were real. Wildlife populations in the sector had increased measurably. Elk herds were using traditional migration routes they had abandoned. The forest was healing in ways that statistical analysis could measure, but struggled to explain to anyone who didn't understand what happens when human pressure is removed from a landscape. Reese continued to walk her property line every morning, continued to maintain her fence and her signs and her defenses. But the tension had gone out of it. The cabin felt more like a home now and less like a forward operating base. Colonel Drummond visited once, made the long drive from Virginia to see the place she had fought so hard to protect. They sat on her porch and watched the sun set over the peaks. 2 warriors who had found something like peace in the aftermath of battles that most people would never know had been fought. "You did good work here," Drummond told her, his voice carrying approval that meant more than any medal ever could. Reminded them that some lines matter, that some people will enforce boundaries when the law can't or won't. "I just wanted to be left alone," Reese said. "I know, but sometimes being left alone requires making people understand that leaving you alone is in their best interest." He paused. "You sleep okay these days?" She thought about that, about the nightmares that had plagued her for years after leaving the service, about the faces of people she had killed through a scope, doing jobs that nations required but didn't want to acknowledge. "Better than I used to," she admitted. "Some nights anyway. That's all any of us can ask for." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The real thing, not a recording, not a psychological operation, just the mountain being the mountain. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Reese Callahan felt something that might have been contentment, Or if not contentment, at least the absence of the constant vigilance that had defined most of her adult life. She had drawn a line, had made it mean something, had enforced it without killing anyone, without becoming the monster that wars sometimes required you to be. The boundary held. And that, in the end, was all she had ever wanted. But sometimes, late at night when the wind was quiet and the mountain held its breath, Reese would take out the photograph that Sheriff Brennan had returned to her, the one of Lily Fisher, 19 years old, smiling at a camera her father had held. She kept it in a drawer, not displayed, not destroyed, just kept. Drummond had asked her once if she regretted giving Garrett the chance to leave, if she wished she'd done something different when he'd stumbled past her in the dark that night, 4 feet away, close enough to touch. "No," she'd said. "I gave him a choice. He made it. But you think about it. I think about all of them. That's the price of winning without killing. You remember every face, every choice they made, every moment they could have walked away." Drummond had nodded. "Good. The day you stop thinking about it is the day you become something else, something worse." She looked at Lily's photograph one more time, then put it back in the drawer, closed it, locked it. Some weights you carried, some boundaries you defended, some choices haunted you even when you made the right call. That was the price of the last boundary, and Reese Callahan would pay it every day for the rest of her life. The mountain kept its secrets. The fence held its line. And in a small cabin at the highest defensible point on 640 acres of Montana wilderness, a 27-year-old woman who had once been one of the most dangerous snipers in the United States Navy lived quietly, maintaining her boundaries and her peace with the same precision she had once used to eliminate threats half a world away. The difference now was that she didn't have to kill to win. She just had to make people believe that she could. And in the 3 years since 5 men had crossed her fence and learned that lesson the hard way, nobody had tested her boundaries again. The last boundary held, and it would continue to hold as long as Reese Callahan was there to defend it.